Let's switch gears now to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is set to present a plan for victory in the country's war with Russia to President Joe Biden during this week's visit to the U.S. Mr. Zelensky also intends to present the plan to Congress and the two candidates in the U.S. presidential election, Democrat Kamala Harris and Republican Donald Trump. He's expected to ramp up efforts to persuade the U.S. and its allies to allow Ukraine to fire the missiles they supplied deep into Russian territory for the first time since the war began. Mr. Zelensky's visit to the U.S. coincides with efforts from the White House to prepare a new $375 million military aid package for Ukraine. In a statement ahead of the visit, the Ukrainian leader previewed three elements to his plan: further weapons donations, diplomatic efforts to force Russia to agree to peace, and holding Moscow accountable for its full-scale invasion in 2022. And Ukraine has been pleading for months for the U.S. and the U.K., as well as other Western allies, to ease restrictions on the use of long-range missiles so it can strike targets in Russia, which Kyiv says are used to launch attacks. Well, the Kremlin is watching President Volodymyr Zelensky's latest actions. A spokesman for the Kremlin, Dmitry Peskov, said today, quote, "We believe that it is impossible to conduct any analysis based on media reports. If some information appears from official sources, of course, we will study it. In the meantime, there is a lot of different information, including contradictory information, unreliable information." Says we are very reserved about this, end quote. And we're also hearing that at least 16 civilians have been injured, including a 15-year-old boy, following Russia's airstrikes in the southeastern city of Zaporizhia. This happened on Sunday. Zaporizhia Governor Ivan Fedorov said on the Telegram, a messaging app, that Russia dealt at least 7 airstrikes to the city and the surrounding districts, damaging 13 apartment buildings, educational institutions, cars, garages, and private residences. Rescuers evacuated residents from several damaged apartment buildings, Ukraine's Interior Ministry said on Telegram. The ministry says, according to preliminary information, Russia used its guided aerial bombs to strike the region. Both sides are denying targeting civilians in their attacks, but thousands of civilians have been killed, the vast majority of them Ukrainians, in the war that Moscow launched with a full-scale invasion in February 2022. Many thanks indeed for staying with us here on the program. This is The World Today. We're live in New York in just a moment to follow and bring you up to speed with updates from UNGA 79. But just turn attention a bit to politics in the U.S., where former President Donald Trump says he does not expect to run for election again in 2028 if he is defeated in the November 5 poll. Trump was speaking in an interview with Sinclair Media Group and was asked if he could foresee another run in the event if he loses to Vice President Kamala Harris. Mr. Trump replied, quote, "No, I don't. I think that will be it," end quote. He does not have hopes, though he will be successful in the November poll. U.S. law bars presidents from serving more than 2 terms, and so Mr. Trump is not expected to run in 2028 if he wins either. In the past, the real estate mogul has rarely acknowledged the possibility of losing the election, more often firing up supporters with speeches and social media posts pledging victory at the polls this November. But this is the second time in 4 days he has mentioned a chance of defeat. To other stories now, the man accused of hiding out with a gun near Mr. Donald Trump's Florida golf course in an apparent attempt to assassinate the former U.S. president is due in court today, where prosecutors will argue to keep him in jail until his trial. 58-year-old Ryan Roth has been charged with 2 guns crimes after he allegedly pointed a rifle through the tree line on September 15 while the Republican presidential candidate was playing golf at his course in West Palm Beach. According to a criminal complaint, he has not yet entered a plea. Prosecutors in that country say that several months prior to the incident, Routh dropped off a handwritten letter addressed to Mr. Trump on a bounty offer. The letter was found in a box handed over by an unidentified civilian witness that also included ammunition in metal pipe and 4 phones. U.S. prosecutors may reveal new details about the investigations at the hearing as they argue that Mr. Routh poses a danger to public safety and must remain detained pending trial. But let's stay in the U.S. for a moment. It's day 2 of the United Nations Summits for the Future. On Sunday, world leaders adopted a pact for the future, which Secretary General Antonio Guterres described as a landmark agreement that is a step change towards more effective, inclusive, and networked multilateralism. The pact, which also includes an annex on working towards a responsible and sustainable digital future, was adopted without a vote at the start of a 2-day summit of the future. The agreement came after some 9 months of negotiations. Secretary General Guterres long pushed for the summit and the pact, which covers themes including peace and security, global governance, sustainable development, climate change, digital cooperation, human rights, gender, youth, and future generations. It lays out some 56 broad actions that countries pledged to achieve, and global crises have been spotlighted. The need for the UN reforms and overhauling international financial systems. These challenges include ongoing wars in Ukraine, Gaza, and Sudan, lagging climate change mitigation efforts, widespread national debt issues, and concerns over technology advancing without governance. Nigeria's Vice President Kashim Shettima is in New York to represent Nigeria at the 79th session of the UN General Assembly. The Vice President touched down at John F. Kennedy International Airport early hours of today, where he was received by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ambassador Yusuf Tuga, Minister of Communications, Innovation, and Digital Economy, Bosun Tijani, DG of the National Information Technology Development Agency, Kashifu Inuwa, and Nigerian diplomats, UN officials, and many others. As directed by President Bola Tinubu, Vice President Shettima is leading Nigeria's delegation to this year's UNGA, where he will deliver Nigeria's national statements and participate in various high-level meetings. Nigeria has emphasized its repeated call for the reforms of the United Nations Security Council to give just representation to Africa on a permanent basis to deepen global peace and security. This is part of the positions put forward by the Minister of Defense, Abubakar Badaru, during his presentation at the Interactive Dialogue on Enhancing Multilateralism for International Peace and Security on the margins of the UN General Assembly in New York. Well, our correspondent Larry Lasisi has these reports on this and other events that held on the sidelines of the global event.
It's a gathering of world leaders for the Summit of the Future, a high-level event organized by the United Nations taking place at the UN headquarters in New York. It's an occasion to discuss and promote global cooperation on pressing issues and address critical global challenges. The Minister of Defense made a presentation at an interactive dialogue on enhancing multilateralism for international peace and security, which took place on the sideline of the summit.
From 1960 in Congo, we have been in 41 different United Nations missions to provide security across the world. Based on that background and the effort of Africa, we also call on the United Nations to reform the United Nations Security Council so that Africa can have a permanent seat. It is time, we deserve it, for justice and for equity and for inclusiveness.
The Minister of Youth Development believes some of these meetings will mobilize resources for the country.
We've gotten a commitment, and we're in the process of going into a memorandum with the Brazilian government in the area of agriculture, because we know that Brazil's economy was developed on agriculture, and we're at that point where the nation needs more young people's energies channeled towards development in agriculture space.
Some state governors also highlight the importance of these meetings to their states.
We just had a meeting now with a company that's in charge of energy, and they're really doing well, and they have the financial capacity to be able to partner with states like Nigeria. So it's an opportunity for Zamfara now to key into these guys so that it will be nice to have proper power in Zamfara state, because that will lead to development.
This first meeting, speaks about developmental and then interconnectivity of electricity. We need some investor to come in and see areas of partnership.
Plateau State, as you know, is one of the early states that took advantage of the liberalization of the power sector. And so we're looking at how to develop capacity in that sector so that we can move from just putting the framework in place to making it a reality.
These meetings are expected to continue into the week as the United Nations General Debate commences on Tuesday, the 24th of September. From New York, Lanre Lasisi, Channels Television News.
And our State House correspondent Larry Lasisi joins us live now from New York. Larry, great to see you again as always. The meetings have officially kicked off, and going from your reports, the Nigerian delegation is already holding meetings. What more are you hearing?
Well, there are a lot of side events happening. I'm sure you're aware, it's a gathering of global leaders. A lot can happen here. Usually outside the General Assembly and the debate that happens, it's an opportunity for world leaders to meet. I have bilateral meetings, see if they can make some agreements and move further as they try to build governance in their respective countries. So we're expecting a lot more high-level meetings. We have a very large delegation from the country here. Outside the ministers, we have governors, we have members of civil society that are also here. As you walk on the street of New York, you run into each other, and as we're far away from home, once you see one, you'll be like, oh yes, what are you here for? And everybody has meetings, everybody's trying to move forward the agenda at different points, youth, women, and all sorts. So there's a lot happening in ground here.
Yeah. And I'd like you, Larry, to touch on the pacts for the future that was signed this morning. We understand that just some moments ago. What could this possibly mean for countries like Nigeria and perhaps the continent?
Okay, well, that pact has 5 critical areas. It's looking at sustainable development, international peace and security, science, technology, youth and future generations, and then transforming global governance. Some of those issues speak to some of the key challenges that we're trying to address in Nigeria, the issue of peace, the issue of sustainable development, the issue of how to get the youth involved and get them engaged, reduce the poverty levels in Nigeria. So the key part of this pact has to be the fact that there appears to be now some sort of agreement internationally to work together to see if it's possible to address this issue. And for Nigeria, it's basically something that we can say it's lovely. It's one we're hoping will help us to a large extent to address some of the key challenges. The issue of climate change will also come in, and these are for facts. For instance, let's take specifically the issue of security, which doesn't only reside within here. We have trying to, on our own, see how we can work with our neighbors to address some of the inter-border incursions. And so with this agreement, it appears we will be able to make some huge steps in trying to address that. So I think for Nigeria, this is good news all the way.
And Larry, early hours of today, Vice President Kashim Shettima touched down in New York. When is the Vice President expected to address the UN Assembly?
Okay, well, yes, just as you rightly reported, the Vice President arrived very early. He's still settling down, as I'm sure, getting briefings to understand what and where he will be appearing. As of now, I don't have information as regards the time of his when he'll be addressing the General Assembly. So we're still working with the government officials here. Once we get that information, we'll pass it forward. He's also expected to have several meetings, which is usually what happens at this forum. So as it happens, and some of these events are fluid, it can come up within notice minutes, and then we'll have to attend. So we'll just keep in touch with the officials, and then they'll guide us along the way.
I mean, I was going to put you on the spot to even ask what perhaps could be in the Vice President's speech, if you have any ideas what could possibly be in his speech.
That would be putting me on the spot.
Absolutely, I understand that. But Larry, I mean, remember the SDG goals? There are 17 of them. The target is 2030. I'm just perhaps wondering just how grave of a concern this is for leaders all around the world as they're gathered right there in New York.
I think like never before, the world is facing challenges that it's just sometimes beyond one country. And as you try to address it, you know that you need cooperation from sister countries, from other countries. So as it is right now, I think for me, everybody is looking at this part to point the way. They're also hoping that it will accelerate even the SDGs to see how those items on the SDGs can also be addressed. So a lot of optimism, a lot of expectation. And like with all these agreements, signing the agreement, as hard as it was to come to an agreement, this is the easy part. The implementation, that is where is going to be where we're going to have to put our eyes on and see if we can do that. Agreement signed, how well can we put it on the ground so that the effect is felt for the world today and for the future.
That's a fine place to anchor a conversation with you. Our State House correspondent Larry Lasisi right there in New York. Other stories now back here in Nigeria. Conditions are a bit difficult for those sheltering in IDP camps in the country's Borno state following severe flooding in that state weeks ago. They have been told they have to vacate the camps immediately as mandated by the Borno state government. Some communities are still flooded, and even in areas where floodwaters have receded, their homes lie in ruins, destroyed by the powerful currents of the flood. The floods in Maiduguri started on September 10 after a dam burst its walls following heavy rainfall and affecting over 1 million people. The government is, however, evaluating the level of aid many households will receive. The floods may have receded, but the impact on lives and livelihood will take a much longer time to rebuild.
The governor himself explaining that nobody was told to leave the IDP camp. So anyone that thinks his house is safe enough to return is free to return voluntarily. But anybody whose community is not yet safe or has nowhere to return can live in the IDP camp until an intervention is provided to him and is habitable to return back. Subsequently, the issue of merging the camps will come up, like to allow the school session to resume. Like people will be evacuated to, non-school camps and then allow academic activities in schools to resume. So this is in the pipeline, but there is no issue of closing the camp actually.
Staying with weather conditions, floods continue across Europe, hitting parts of UK today, blocking roads and causing travel disruptions. The Meteorological Office has warned of continued outbreaks of heavy rain in southern and central parts of the country. When one Brentfordshire resident said he had never seen such flooding in the 10 years he had been living there. Elsewhere in Europe, at least 17 people died earlier this month. From Romania to Poland, the worst flooding to affect Central Europe in 2 decades.
Clearly last night there was a hell of a rainfall and the river started rising. When I got up this morning, the back garden was partially flooded. Now it's completely flooded and it must be under about 8 or 9 inches of water. It's never been this bad since we've lived here in 2013.
In the meantime, record rains have killed at least 7 people in Japan's Noto region as of this morning. Local media in that country say among those killed was a person who was working on quick reconstruction, while 2 persons are still missing. Early rainfall hit record 4.8 inches on Saturday morning in Wajima, while neighboring Suzu received 84.5 millimeters in an hour, and also an all-time high. The region is still recovering from the massive damage caused by a 7.6 magnitude quake on New Year's Day, which killed more than 300 people in Suzu, Wajima, and surrounding areas. Now, 3 migrants have died and many more were feared missing after their boat sank today off the Greek island of Samos. Migrants rescued by the country's Coast Guard were seen on board the vessel at the island's port town of Karlovasi before leaving on a bus. At least 30 migrants were believed to be initially on board the vessel that foundered off the rocky shores of Agios Isidoros, the northwestern parts of the Aegean island. The 3 migrants found dead are women. 5 migrants had been rescued so far, among them a pregnant woman and a minor who were taken to hospital for medical checks. Welcome back. Survivors of sexual abuse in Belgium are calling on Pope Francis to take stronger actions against perpetrators and push for deeper reforms in the Catholic Church days ahead of his visits to Brussels. The 87-year-old pontiff, who has described abuse as demonic and says he has made prevention a priority, is due to meet survivors and activists on a tour of Belgium and Luxembourg that will also focus on migrants. Jean-Marc Turin, a 78-year-old writer who was abused as a child at a Catholic school in Brussels, says the church had not done enough to respond to the wider crisis. More than 700 complaints and reports of abuse involving the church have been made in Belgium since 2012, according to reports by the Catholic Church in Belgium in 2022. Catholic clergy abuse scandals have emerged in countries across the world in recent decades. In July, New Zealand released a public inquiry finding that some 200,000 children, young people, and vulnerable adults were abused in state and religious care over the last 70 years. Sri Lanka's new president, Anura Kumara, has vowed to bring clean politics and revive his country's economy. He was making the promise in his inauguration speech earlier today. Well, Mr. Anura, a Marxist-leaning politician with no political lineage, won a comprehensive victory in the debt-ridden South Asian country's presidential election a day earlier. The 55-year-old, who does not possess political lineage like some of his rivals in the presidential election, led from start to finish during the counting of votes, knocking out incumbent President Ranil Wickremesinghe and opposition leader Savi Predemaska. This was the country's first election since its economy buckled in 2022 under a severe foreign exchange shortage, leaving it unable to pay for imports of essentials, including fuel, medicine, and cooking gas. Protests forced then President Gotabaya Rajapaksa to flee and later resign. And China has thrown its weight behind Sri Lanka's new president. Spokesperson Lin Jiang said today China is willing to continue to play a constructive role in the smooth economic and social development of Sri Lanka on the premise of the principle of non-interference in internal affairs. The comment comes as the president took his oath of office today, promising change in the island nation, long led by powerful political families emerging from its worst economic crisis in more than 7 decades. In October last year, Sri Lanka announced an agreement with the Export-Imports Bank of China to delay payments on about $4.2 billion worth of loans the Chinese lender has extended to the country. And there is more support, this time coming from the European Union, EU, for Sri Lanka's new president. The Election Observer Mission of the EU at a press conference in Colombo earlier today commended the Election Commission for its management of the nationwide voting process. Chief Observer Nacho Amor, however, criticized the hours-long curfew imposed on election night, calling it a troubling sign from the authorities regarding their respect for voters.
Well, there are actually two. But the question, I'm very happy to say, probably this is of my long list of missions, the mission in which I had the opportunity to appreciate the commitment and the capacity and the excellent results of the work of the Election Commission. In many ways, very transparent, very efficient, very professional, trusted. Not one single of my interlocutors, and probably the rest of the team, has never cast a minor doubt about the attitude of the Election Commission. And to enjoy this trust is really an asset that you have to enjoy it and keep it and to take care of. The same day in which a state institution, as the Election Commission said, this has been the most peaceful electoral campaign and electoral process in our history. The same day, there was a curfew. And this is not matching. Some of the contenders, they didn't protest because after this fear-mongering campaign, talking about the inevitability of the violence, probably some contenders were afraid that anything that happened is going to be attributed to us. You have many things to show to other countries. And one has been mentioned. It's better to discuss about the economy than discussing about religion. Look what's happening in Bangladesh. It's better to discuss about the welfare and the daily progress of the people. And you have to suspect when your political elite escape from this framework is because they don't have a lot to offer for the daily life of the people, so they escape to the creation of tension to try to use the tension in a way that could be conducive for the goal. But you have many things to export to many countries in the world regarding the excellency in general of your political electoral process.
And we end the program on this daredevil notes. French athlete Tom Page combined motocross and paragliding to produce the world's first ride and fly in the French Alps. The five-time X Games gold medalist spent over 2 years working on the spectacular stunt, which was dreamed up and developed with his friend Valentin Deluc. After taking off, Page had to unhook his paraglider controls and take his hands off the handler bars to navigate the flight. He reached speeds of more than 80 kilometers per hour on the glider and a third the size of a paraglider wing. And during the tight turns close to the ground, his speed peaked at nearly 100 kilometers per hour. find such a fate for Tom. Perhaps you want to add that to your bucket list, but you have to dream it and spend at least 2 years to prepare. That does it for us on this edition of The World Today. Thanks indeed for watching. On behalf of the production team and everyone here, I'm Kelly Egiga. Bye now.